You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of OverAnalyzing, the series where I take a more in-depth look at the fictional universes which I love. Decided it's time I get back into some more Go Nagai content. It's been a minute, and I used to do it all the time, and I gotta keep my record as the #1 Go Nagai channel, am I right? But seriously, I think that I do have the most videos on Go Nagai properties. I don't even think it's close. The only one who is potentially my competition on that is the Anime Hero, and I think I've done a decent amount more than him. Enough about that. Enough about being a little narcissistic asshole. Let's actually get into today's topic, yeah? So today I wanted to talk about Go Nagai adaptations. Now, I'm going to mention a few different Go Nagai works. Clearly, I'm not going to cover everything, because that'd just be ridiculous. But obviously, as a big fan of Go Nagai, I'm pretty familiar with quite a few of his works. I'm going to focus on some of the more popular ones and some of my favorites, and just ones that stick out to me. So, let's start with, like, his big three. That'll be a good starting point. So, as I've said in multiple videos, for some reason in Japan, they tend to like their big threes. And they have big three anime, big three manga, big three, like, production studios. And they do the same thing in Korea, because there's, like, the big three, like, K-pop or whatever. So for whatever reason, Asia's got a thing with big threes. We probably have that over here in the West, too, and I'm just ignorant on it. But I've noticed it's a pretty big trend. But Go Nagai's big three are Devilman, Mazinger Z, and Cutie Honey. Devilman is obviously my favorite of the three, and I think Go Nagai is most passionate about Devilman out of the three. Mazinger Z, he literally wrote to blow off steam. But let's talk about their adaptations, because they each had adaptations in the 70s as well as later adaptations. So we'll start with Devilman. Devilman had the 1972 anime, which had virtually nothing to do with the manga. Like, obviously, on a surface level, there's a lot of recurring characters from the manga, like Akira Fudo, Miki Makimura, and the rest of the Makimura family in general. Plus, we know we got Siren, Agwell, and Gelmar, although their names are a little bit changed. Point is, there is some demons that were in the original Devilman. There's also Xenon, obviously. The 72 anime was more of a superhero Saturday morning cartoon vibe, as opposed to the dark, fucked up, and depressing tragedy that the manga is. That said, the 1972 anime does do a few things that I really like that I actually think stand out. For instance, I think Miki Makimura and the Makimura family in general are their most interesting in the 1972 anime. They're much more entertaining to watch. They're much more fleshed out and have more personality. I like Miki and Tare because of the 1972 series, which was the first Devilman I watched. Like, I watched Violence Jack before that, and I read the Violence Jack manga before it. But the 72 anime was the first one that I actually watched. You know, that was actually called Devilman. Another interesting distinction is that this version, rather than having Akira merge with Ammon and become Devilman, it's a demon named Devilman who takes Akira's place by stealing his body. They sort of toyed with this in Devilman Grimoire, but Grimoire got really confusing with it, with the ending, with the Solomon stuff and everything, and it made it really complicated. And honestly, the ending to Grimoire, I think, left a lot to be desired. And here's where we're going to get spoilers for the 72 anime coming up, just to warn you. But this one doesn't have everybody die, obviously. Miki and Akira obviously don't die. Satan doesn't even actually exist as a character in this. There is actually a demon called God. God himself isn't actually in it, but there's a demon called God, which is basically just like the opposite of Devilman, so it's like God versus the devil, which maybe is another reason that leads people to think that God is the bad guy in Devilman, because, you know, there literally is a demon named God in this. That's a topic for another video as to whether or not God is the bad guy in Devilman. I would say he's not in the original, but that's beside the point. When you factor in the sequels, it gets a little bit more complicated than that. But the 72 series, and again, more spoilers ahead for it, does end with, you know, Akira defeating the demon god, but Xenon's still being out there, leaving room for more, where he's like, I've defeated all your demons you've sent after me, and Xenon's like, I'll still keep hunting you, but it also reveals to Miki that Akira is actually Devilman. They don't really go into the detail of him not actually being Akira and being a demon that took his place. I don't know if they just kind of forgot that, or if they just intentionally leave Miki oblivious to it, and Miki just acts like, oh, well, Akira's always Akira, but it's like, it's literally not. So the 72 series is great. I did a whole review on it, and then that review got fucking blocked worldwide because Toei, and then I had to draw a bunch of pictures in MS Paint. Anyway, enough of that being salty. I love the 72 series, but it's very tonally different from the manga. The next adaptation we would get would be the OVAs. Now, there have been spin-offs and stuff, right? You know, like there was Mazinger Z versus Devilman and stuff, but I'm primarily talking about the adaptation of the original story. So we're not really going to touch on Devilman Lady here, although we might if I decide to talk about Devilman Lady's adaptation as well. Which, fuck it, I guess I will since I brought it up, but we'll get to it in a little bit. The next adaptation for the original Devilman, though, was the OVA series. Now, I like to call it the OVA trilogy. The third episode was made years later by a different studio, with a different cast, different animation style, and is based off a spin-off, so it's debatable whether it can actually be included, and I just remember I read somewhere once that it was meant to be considered a sequel to the original two OVAs. That's the only reason I call it a trilogy. I literally never vetted if that was true, but that's what I'm getting at is, that's what I would call the trilogy. The Birth, Demon Bird, and Ammon Apocalypse of Devilman. And again, Ammon Apocalypse of Devilman is open for debate as to whether you can actually call it a third in the series. But the first two OVAs adapt the first 2 or 3 volumes of the manga. I think it's 3, because it goes up to Jinmen, which I'm pretty sure is the 3rd volume out of the 5 volumes originally. But it changes the chronology and puts Jinmen before Siren. But it only adapts those, but it adapts them really well. It's actually basing them off a spin-off novel that Go Nagai's brother wrote. So there are some changes with Jinmen that were kind of also rolled over into Crybaby, and here's where we're going to get some spoilers for both the OVA and Crybaby. This video will be loaded with spoilers, I'm just going to tell you that right now. I'll try to warn when I'm approaching them, but just expect them to be throughout. So anyway, with the OVA, it only adapts those, but it adapts them really well. It's pretty faithful to the original manga. It adds in a few things here and there, like Akira's rabbits that he has. It replaces Ryo's gun with a knife. And it changes, you know, the random little girl who was on Jinmen's back to be Akira's mom, which is a change that they rolled over into Crybaby as well. But I think it was handled way better in the OVA. So that's sort of the outline of the OVA. Let's talk about Crybaby a little bit, and then I'll tell you which is the best version, because these are the 3 main adaptations, not including spin-offs and sequels. As far as that goes, the OVA also, like I said, there's Ammon, but that does adapt Miki's death and a few other pretty important things from the manga. So that said, I still count it as a trilogy because it still has elements from the ending. But the OVAs obviously do not tell the complete story. Then we had Crybaby, which was the first adaptation to actually adapt the entirety of Devilman, the original story. And I remember I had a much more favorable review of it when it first came out. As you've probably noticed, I've become much more soured on it and have a much more negative take on it than I used to. Crybaby does do a serviceable job at adapting the original manga, but it does a lot of things that drive me absolutely insane. It adds in a bunch of unnecessary sex scenes and stuff that wasn't there, and that doesn't necessarily bother me, because I do like gratuitous stuff, right? Like, I'm a Go Nagai fan, and I like Irotsuki Doji and stuff like that, right? Like, I like Iroguro shit to an extent. So, obviously, that's not gonna put me off on its own. A lot of it is unnecessary and feels kind of forced. Like, when Akira just comes all over the ceiling and it, like, drips down onto him, that's fucking disgusting. Or, like, they added in gay sex that wasn't there originally. The art style is, like, a lot of people love it. I can't stand it most of the time. There's some things that I aesthetically like about it, but I think that it's just far too simplistic, doesn't fit the characters, and honestly just looks bad to me. Like, there are things I like about it aesthetically, like Devilman himself looks okay, but Akira looks kind of stupid, especially in the first episode. Later episodes, he looks a little bit better. Like I said, I did a whole review on this that I actually was a lot more pleasant on, where I actually praised it. I did still knock the art style a little bit because of some of the weird over-the-top cartoony choices. Like, I would say, aesthetically, it's more cartoony than the 72 anime, which is literally going for that Saturday morning cartoon vibe. But Crybaby does do a few things really well, as I talked about in my whole video, you know, 5 things Crybaby does right, 5 things it does wrong. The soundtrack's amazing. It knocks Miki's death out of the park, making the best version of Miki's death ever created. And the fact that it does adapt the whole story is great. There's some weird pacing issues, I find. They kind of ruined Ryo's character by getting rid of, like, any of his development, which, to be fair, wasn't as good as it could have been in the manga, too. There is some to be desired with Ryo's development in the original story, but at least he fucking had it. Whereas in Crybaby, they just scrap, like, all of his character arc. But out of those, I'll tell you what is the best. If you couldn't tell, I think that the 1990s and 80s version of the OVA, you know, started in 89, had an episode in 1990, and then was followed by Ammon Apocalypse of Devilman in 2001, or was it 2000? One of the two. But the point is, that's the best version. The first 2 episodes especially, I think they're fucking great. I always recommend people start with those first 2 episodes. I don't recommend they start with Ammon, because it skips so far ahead in the manga that people would just be confused. But I really love the 1990s OVAs. They're really fucking good. They adapt the story really faithfully. They get the tone right. The art style is great. The soundtrack's great. They got a Japanese metal band Anthem in it, and that's really great. I always recommend people start with the sub and then watch the dub, because both are great for very different reasons. The sub is best to start with to get the atmosphere and story, whereas the dub is fucking hilarious because it's manga entertainment, so of course it is. Unfortunately, we never got a continuation of the OVAs. Instead, they did Chibi-Chara Go Nagai World, which I still like. It's one of the few, you know, chibi spin-off, comedy, funny little spin-off things that I've enjoyed. I mean, I suppose I like elements of DD Fist of the North Star. That's kind of fun to watch. So I guess those aren't inherently bad. They're just not good in the same way, you know what I mean? And it definitely is inferior to getting the rest of Devilman adapted into those OVAs. I planned on at one point doing a whole video on how Go Nagai's work best as OVAs. I've probably mentioned it in passing in other videos on similar topics. I'm thinking I actually might split this up into multiple parts. So we're gonna just finish this off with Devilman Lady and just talk about that. But yeah, the best adaptation, I think, of Devilman original is the 1990s OVA. The 72 series is also great, and Crybaby has pretty hit or miss for me. Honestly, I don't like it anywhere near as much as I used to. But talking about Devilman Lady, the manga and anime are both pretty different. For instance, in the manga, June is a teacher. In the anime, she's a model. In the manga, the demons are originally thought to be these things called devil beasts, which are like an evolutionary virus sort of thing, until it's later, and again, spoilers, until it's later revealed that they actually are demons, because June goes to hell and meets Akira, and that whole thing, and then Devilman Ghost happens, which I think are actually some of the best chapters of Lady, even though they were added in later. The anime doesn't follow the story the whole way through. It just becomes an episodic monster of the week sort of thing. Just has June fighting different demons every week. They turned Asuka into a total bitch of a character, whereas she was a lot more sympathetic in the manga. That's like the female equivalent of Rio, even though she's technically, and again, spoilers, the male half of Rio, and June is the female half, which is another huge difference. That plot point does not exist in the anime. In the anime, June and Asuka are their own characters rather than just being two halves of Rio. Also, it doesn't have that stupid ending where God just shows up and then Rio's like, help me fight God, and then Akira's like, oh, okay. Also, the anime has sort of another version of Akira named Takeshi, who has the motorcycle and stuff like he does from the 70s series. Overall, I think that the manga is better, but the anime has a considerably better ending and works better as its own thing. In that regard, some people might look at the anime as better, because the ending to the Devilman Lady manga is absolutely atrocious. It's fucking terrible. I hate it. But that said, the anime has a pretty decent ending. Like, it's nothing to write home about, but it actually has, like, a normal ending and doesn't just have God just randomly show up and kill everybody again in a single sentence. I think, honestly, we could just use another adaptation of Devilman Lady that actually has a better ending, and I would like that a lot, as if it adapted the manga more accurately but changed the ending. If they did that, I'd be all for it. I'd also love to see Devilman Saga get adapted, but who knows if that's ever going to happen. Another adaptation worth mentioning, at least in passing, is the Devilman live-action movie from 2004. It's not the best thing in the world, but it's not the worst anime movie adaptation. It does have some weird modernization stuff, with having the demon mask be technological, and with having Rio be a different kind of demon and not just Satan. So there's some weird stuff with that, but they cram the whole thing into one movie, and honestly, it's a more accurate adaptation than Crybaby in some aspects, so there's that. It's not better than Crybaby. It is definitely worse, but it is more accurate as an adaptation. Also, Crybaby does this thing where they make it, like, really about racism, whereas it was about war originally, and I hate that. I loved the anti-war message of the original. But yeah, I think that's good enough for part 1. So part 1 will be Devilman. I guess part 2 we'll talk about Mazinger Z, which is ironic, because Mazinger Z was the reason I wanted to talk about this stuff. But I figured I had to start with Devilman. I'm like the Devilman guy on YouTube, am I right? Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Catch you in the next one. Toodles.
Subscribe, feed it to Red Eye.